Hello, everyone. It is Karen Campbell with the Dog Gurus, and we are back for our weekly Facebook Live. Today, I am joined by two fellow Dog Guru coaches, Ed Kazmarek, who owns Urban Pooch in Chicago, Illinois, and Anna Radel, who is at Fieldstone Animal Inn in Millersville, Maryland. Is that correct? Or are you actually in Severna Park?
Yeah, I'm in Millersville.
You're in Millersville. Okay, perfect. And then our special guest is Dr. Jessica Hurd. She's a veterinarian practicing in the Severna Park area of Maryland. And we wanted to have an opportunity to talk to everybody about the whole respiratory issue with dogs and what we're seeing in that classification of the new canine infectious respiratory disease complex, big acronym there. So, but to kick us off, if we could have somebody drop in the chat that you can hear us, that we are live, that would be amazing. And in the meantime, if you are new to the Dog Gurus, we are a pet care consulting business that offers both pet consulting services or business consulting services and staff training. And we are here to help pet care businesses launch, grow, and profit. So with that, Jessica, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background on you as far as your veterinarian history and practice.
Okay. I have known Anna Radel for a number of years, and I have been a veterinarian for 25 years now. And I was an associate veterinarian in Georgia for a number of years before I bought my own practice. So I've managed a 4 or 5 doctor practice for about 20 years now. And so I've seen lots of versions of canine infectious disease come about. And I have, worked with multiple lodging facilities and mostly Anna's and animal control in our area, and have watched the emergence of these new viruses and these new things come out.
So one of the things that we spoke about when we were prepping for this is how the new acronym, that CIRDC, which for us as business owners in the pet care industry seems to be more of a newer term, but you are actually mentioning that it's been around for a while. It's just kind of becoming more popular as an acronym.
Right. So when you asked about the acronym itself, I did a little research, and I first found it in the research actually back in 2006. So CIRDC has been around for a long time in terms of an acronym. And essentially what CIRDC is it's the reason they call it an infectious respiratory disease complex is because there's lots of things that can cause respiratory disease, and respiratory disease is multifactorial. So pollution, air quality, from recently we've seen the smoke in Canada that's come down to a lot of the Northeast that can exacerbate respiratory conditions, and any inflammation can leave them, pets and dogs specifically, and cats, but dogs is what we're talking about today, ripe for infections. Anytime you have any underlying inflammation, they are allergies or any type of irritant or contaminant, it can make them more prone to getting an infectious component of respiratory disease.
So true. So I know as an industry, we are trying to get away from the term kennel cough because that sounds as though a dog visits our facility and that's where they get it. But because it's airborne, they can literally pick it up anywhere. So, but one of the things that I think we also discussed was that often when dogs are in a situation that there is a stress component and they are barking, or even an overstimulation, not necessarily stress related, but they do bark more persistently, that irritation you're saying can also cause some sort of respiratory distress or issue?
Absolutely. If you've ever, as we were talking yesterday, if you've ever gone to a concert where you've sung a lot or yelled a lot or been at a football game and you come home the next day and you're hoarse, that and being around 20 or 30 or 50,000 of your closest friends will make you prone to getting a cold or getting bronchitis or something afterwards. That is, and dogs in lodging facilities, and they're having fun, but a lot of them, mine included, bark a lot at other dogs, and the constant barking while they're there will contribute to anything that can cause irritation, which is part of the reason they call it a complex, is because it is something that usually is multifactorial. Not that lodging really contributes to it one way or another, other than the fact that some dogs are stressed when they lodge or in a veterinary facility. And some stress, just like in people, is good stress, and some stress is bad stress. But anything that causes physiologic inflammation or decreased immune response will make them prone to picking up other secondary either viruses or bacteria.
So let's switch just a little. Within that complex, are we looking at just bacterial infections, or is there bacterial and viral infections?
So in the complex is everything that could cause respiratory disease in dogs is technically what could be in that complex. And it means, and essentially what they've done is any of these things or a combination of these things can cause respiratory disease. So it can include even things like distemper, it can include canine influenza, it can include parainfluenza, include, there is a canine infectious coronavirus that is respiratory. It can include Bordetella, Mycoplasma, Streptococcus. So it can include both viruses and bacteria in the infectious component. And then you have, of course, the stress component, and then the possibly environmental component, which could be irritants or pollutants or anything that a dog is allergic to. So it could be all kinds of, when they talk about a complex, because it usually does require a complex of things for them to get sick.
Okay, excellent. So let's talk a little bit about the canine influenza virus. That is something that there is a vaccination for, correct?
There is a vaccination for. There is a vaccination for that, and there is a vaccination, I'm sure, as you all know, for Bordetella bronchoseptica. So the influenza vaccine is an injectable viral vaccine. The vaccine is actually, it is influenza A, but it has two variants, and the one variant causes them to be more sick than the other. So ideally, you want dogs vaccinated with a bivalent vaccine, a vaccine that actually gets both variants of it. And in terms of, the vaccine, it is a little bit like coronavirus vaccine in people, that it doesn't necessarily completely prevent them from getting it, but it can prevent them from getting very sick with it. And what you're really trying to do is mitigate the severity of the disease. And because unfortunately, canine influenza, 20% of dogs that get it can spread it, but don't necessarily show any symptoms at all. So the symptoms are very widely depending on the dog's immune system, their age, and other factors.
Thank you. So Ed, I want to turn to you really quickly, because I know one of the first major outbreaks in a city for canine influenza happened in Chicago around, I want to say 2015. Don't quote me on that exact date. But you were saying that when that happened, you and your facility made the decision to require the canine influenza vaccination. What has been your experience now that you've required that? And are you seeing other facilities in your area that are requiring it? And with having that as a requirement, are you seeing that your facility has not been impacted by it?
Sure. We ended up requiring it because we had heard of some dogs dying at other facilities across the country from when canine influenza, when it was really, really bad. And, I think originally, even our vets, we had recommended the bivalent vaccine, but I guess that, back then it was a little more expensive and not every vet had the bivalent. So, we accepted what was available, but now all the vets in our area are doing the bivalent vaccine. And since we started requiring it, we have had no canine influenza or, any outbreaks in our facility. And when we started requiring it, we slowly started seeing, all of the other daycare facilities requiring it. And I think almost all of them require it. And we have not heard of any influenza outbreaks in Chicago. The closest one I've heard of recently is Michigan.
That's fantastic. So Anna, given that you're on the East Coast, do you require the vaccine at your facility? And have you seen sort of the same anecdotal outcome that Ed has had? Oh, you're muted, Anna.
Sorry, my two dogs love to come in and out, and so I always keep myself on mute because they like to speak when they're not supposed to. So we have required the bivalent canine influenza vaccine for, I believe, about 4 years now, at least. And Dr. Hurd helped us roll that out. It was difficult, and I think if I can speak to that a little bit, because it's awesome and that in Chicago you've had that everyone jump on that. We hadn't seen any significant outbreaks in Maryland, hardly at all. We've heard about them, but we started to hear more and more, and so we then started asking clients to do it. The problem and challenge has been that not all facilities do it in our area. And so they haven't had the availability of the vaccine because there hasn't been that demand in our area. So hopefully that tide is turning, because we've definitely seen a large outbreak in our area over the holidays, I believe, is when it started. And unfortunately, some of my colleagues in the area didn't require it, and they have been affected. And one of them had to close over the Christmas holiday, which was devastating to their business. And ironically, and I keep knocking on wood, we have not seen any cases or any significant outbreaks here. And I kept thinking, okay, we're going to be ready. It's coming. Like Dr. Hurd said, they're going to get sick, but just not as sick. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And it hasn't. I actually have one employee whose her pet got sick. And so I paid for the test, and it turned out to be what Dr. Hurd said was coronavirus. So it wasn't even the flu. So it's been very interesting to see the dramatic difference between my facility and others in the area that didn't require it.
That's excellent. So we just had a comment from Mikey Cunningham, who's in Idaho, and they have never had an outbreak in Idaho that she's aware of, and she found that it's almost twice the price for clients to get the vaccination. And so it seems like it's a dangerous situation. She wants to be proactive, but it's somewhat cost prohibitive because of where she's at in the country. I know for us, Alaska, have experienced somewhat of the same thing, that we've never had a case that has happened here at least in the Anchorage area. But most of the vets are starting to carry it because we have such a huge tourist season, and a lot of those tourists arrive via a vehicle. They come up in an RV, and when they do, they're bringing their pets with them. So I think we are now being a lot more proactive in our area in vaccinating our local pets, so that we are making sure that if a dog that comes up that is exposing them and may not be exhibiting symptoms, that our dogs that are local are protected. So
Carrie,
oh, go ahead.
can I also, add and just jump off of what Anna said? Many of our Dog Gurus clients from the Profit Network, some of them had to close for 2 or 3 weeks. And then after that, and you can imagine how much that costs.
Absolutely.
And after that, decided to require the vaccine, because sometimes dogs do get very, very sick and even can get pneumonia.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes when they have and Dr. Hurd, you could answer this, but when dogs come up with some sort of a respiratory irritation, it's that chronic coughing that can lead to secondary infections, right? Okay.
Absolutely. And I mean, and even a lot of pulling on a leash can contribute to irritation of the trachea, which is part of the reason when they come in with a cough, we'll recommend put them on a harness for a little while, because their trachea is, we've all seen these dogs. It's like they're suddenly all sled dogs. They just will pull and pull and pull until they bark a lot. So, until they start coughing, and they just, even when they're coughing, they won't stop. So yeah, any barking, any pulling, all of that can contribute to coughing. And just like there are people with chronic emphysema and asthma and those sorts of things, there are dogs that have a little bit of that chronic stuff too. And then, they're also prone to these infections. And with canine influenza, they can be infected within a few hours of exposure. It takes very little time for them to be infected, and actually symptoms can start within 48 hours of infection. So it can take very little time for you have one coughing dog, and then suddenly you have 100 coughing dogs. That's not all of them are going to be symptomatic, so you won't have 100% of them be coughing, but it can spread really quickly.
So for any pet parents that may be out there watching, are there any medical conditions that may cause a cough in a dog that's unrelated to a respiratory issue?
Absolutely. I mean, and actually the reason the CIRDC, you know, term exists is because there are conditions like heart conditions and asthma and emphysema that are not part of the infectious respiratory disease complex. Those things will still make dogs more prone to getting an infectious respiratory disease, but they are not part of the complex at all. And we have dogs with chronic bronchitis or asthma, COPD type things that cough and are on steroids, but don't have anything infectious going on. That's very common in both older people and older animals.
So would you recommend as a veterinarian, if you have, say, an older pet with a heart condition, that they not be lodged in a pet care facility, or should they have any sort of, special requirements that the pet care facility may have to do in order to protect them?
So I think that if a heart condition is stable, then they can absolutely be lodged. They do need to stay on their medications, and those are the animals that should absolutely be vaccinated, because those are the pets that are those are the ones at most risk, the ones with an underlying respiratory or cardiac condition. Those are the pets that we're actually trying to save and to make sure they don't get sick in our care, because those are the ones that will get very, very sick. But I don't recommend that they not lodge or be around other dogs. You do have to be careful about exercise, exertion, and keeping them in appropriate groups, and temperature, and all the things that you normally have to do for older animals on a regular basis. But as long as their parents tell you what's going on, I feel like in general, just like people with heart conditions, a little bit of exercise and having fun is just a really important part of their day to day.
Great. So we had Tammy ask, is there a time frame from vaccinating to lodging that should be required? So currently, like for Bordetella, they do 14 days prior to their visit or their stay at the pet care facility.
Right. In my ideal world, it is 2 to 3 weeks prior. That's my ideal. Is ideal always achievable? No, we don't live in a world like that, but 14 to 21 days is the ideal situation. And that's also very hard with the current circumstances of shortages as well right now, because having the vaccine shortages might mean that they can't get it that far in advance, and that does make it really difficult. And for people who talk about it being expensive, I think, well, it's probably still less expensive than a trip to the vet to get on medication or to treat it afterwards, or to, have to quarantine and disinfect so much of your facility. I mean, everything seems expensive when you're looking at it in advance, but in hindsight, it seems actually vaccine is one of the cheaper ways to manage it.
Is the vaccine a one and done shot, or is it multiple shots?
No, it's a series of 2, and then it's a yearly vaccine. All influenza vaccines, none of them are perfect, but it is a series of 2. So so ideally they have to actually plan more than a month out, because they have to get the one, and then they get the one 2 to 3 weeks out, and then they should wait 2 or 3 weeks. So where it becomes really difficult is people who think they're leaving in a week and they can't get it done in time. You actually have to have that, plan
Right.
set up in advance.
Perfect. So what do you see as the most common symptoms that dogs will show if they have come into contact with some sort of respiratory illness?
So usually there's the kind of, we've all had some of the honking cough. We've all heard some of that we'll see with a lot of them. With the strain that we worry about, the H3N2 strain, that's the strain where we'll actually see some clear nasal discharge, or even some yellowish nasal discharge. Sometimes they'll be a little lethargic. They'll run a low-grade fever with that as well, in addition to the cough. But usually the cough is the first sign, and then it's followed by those other things. We tend to get worried if they're not eating and drinking well, but if they're eating and drinking well otherwise, and they're not having open mouth breathing, or, struggling in any way, sometimes there's nothing, their parents are out of town, and there's not much you can do other than try to keep, isolate them from other dogs.
Perfect. Let's see. So you talked a little bit about the shortage of the vaccine. Is that something that's being addressed by the manufacturers, or is it?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
okay.
Well, yes, because the manufacturers want to get it out because the demand is so high. Every day they are, every day that they're essentially don't have it is less money they're making, and they know that there's a shortage out there. So there are two manufacturers at the moment, and part of what occasionally happens is one of the manufacturers will go down and then the other one just everything gets bought out. So, and then everything seems to come up, and the market gets flooded, and there's plenty for a while, and we think that we're not going to have this problem again, and then it goes back. So it's a little bit of a delicate vaccine. So
Renee asked, how long is the dog contagious for once they start coughing? And is that specific to, is it Bordetella, or is it the influenza, or does it vary amongst all the different?
Well, it varies. Typically we'll say they can be contagious for usually up to 2 weeks after they start coughing until they clear the infection. And viral replication and shedding from the time they're infected can happen within 24 hours of when they're infected. So they can get sick and start shedding the virus before you get to even the 48-hour part.
Okay.
So that can happen before they even become symptomatic, which is difficult because you don't even know that they're shedding the virus. So it's very similar to what we've seen in people with some of the stuff that is going on. And antibiotics do not help with a viral condition, but it can help with secondary infections. So dogs don't necessarily die of influenza by itself. Dogs, they tend to get really sick and die from secondary infections. So those are the streptococcus infections and the mycoplasma infections, the Pasteurella infections. The streptococcus infections are what cause them to have basically almost hemorrhagic coughing. They're coughing up blood and that sort of thing. And unfortunately, the viral diseases make them prone to picking up the bacterial diseases. And again, it's very similar to influenza in our senior population in humans. But part of the reason that people get influenza vaccine in the senior population is so they don't get the secondary pneumonias and those sorts of things. There's no way you can completely avoid being exposed to bacteria out in the world. It's almost impossible. We all disinfect, we all clean, we all do all of those things. The virus doesn't actually stay alive outside of the dog for very long, but but you can, if the more factors you can take out of the infectious disease respiratory complex, the less complex you make it, the safer all of the dogs are.
So Ed and Anna, I want to bring you in on this conversation as well. When we're looking at it for a pet care business owner's perspective, if an outbreak occurs, what do you do? What would be the first step if you notice a dog that is symptomatic?
I'm muted still.
Oh, no, you can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So we get that question all the time. And of course, my Dr. Hurd and I are close friends. And so generally I talk to her, and I ask, is there an outbreak? Are you seeing cases? And we have relationships with multiple vets in our area, and we tend to try to find out what's going on in the community. Of course, we have a procedure in place. We have a letter that goes out to our clients. Our reservation specialist will tell clients, hey, this is what's going on. It's being seen in the area. These are the symptoms you should look for, and know that, that there is a maybe higher chance, or there's a risk, of course, when they come in. And so for me, I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's all about education, right? Empowering your clients with that information. And as I look at the questions that are being asked, I realize we still have to do that with owners too, so that they understand what the risks are. And I think we so hyper focus on one or two things that cause these things. And unfortunately, owners, they react and think, I'm going to bleach down everything, which is really just makes you feel better. And I don't think it makes much of a difference in your facility. So my big thing, and I think the way we always have been, is we're very honest with our clients, and we are proactive in communicating to them what they should look out for and what's going on.
Ed, do you have any additions to add to
Yes,
that?
I totally agree with everything Anna said. And we immediately isolate the dog, but we do not have a room with its own ventilation system, because it's cost prohibitive. But we do have a room that is away from the dog population. And I mean, we do use rescue, which is, one of the disinfectants that many vets use. So that is effective at killing, many of the pathogens that we're talking about. And I, wholeheartedly agree about the education. And we immediately reach out to our vet partners as well. And, we over communicate with our pet parents.
That's great. I do think, yeah, kind of isolation, addressing what cleaning protocols you have. You mentioned rescue. For those that don't know, that's an accelerated hydrogen peroxide cleaning solution, similar to what a lot of hospitals are using, and veterinarian hospitals. I know it's very common for them to use that. And then, tracking kind of who was patient zero and what other dogs had they come into contact with, notifying pet parents. And then, as Anna was saying, that you had someone in your area around Christmas who actually had to close their business due to the outbreak. I mean, there's definitely pros and cons with doing that. It's a hit for your revenue stream for sure, but also it is an opportunity to immediately clean and disinfect the entire facility to try and rid the facility as much as possible of the virus or the bacteria that's there. I wanted to ask Dr. Hurd, there was another question from Mariah about, are other areas noticing long-lasting symptoms to these upper respiratory infections, and how do they determine whether it's long-lasting damage or an active infection? It makes me think of long COVID, right? Because I know some people have gotten that. So
right. So it will tend to be older animals that tend to develop either scar tissue or chronic respiratory problems. Simply getting influenza itself in a young, healthy dog will probably not result in long-lasting problems. But sometimes what reveals the fact that, they didn't know they had an underlying heart condition, or they didn't know that they had an underlying COPD until they also got influenza. It was like, they've always had a little cough when they wake up, but that's something that everyone thought was just kind of, I wasn't that worried about it. But sure enough, then they get the secondary infection and they're like, it turns out we do have this underlying condition. So it's hard to always know which came first, because obviously influenza doesn't cause heart disease and I don't think it necessarily causes some chronic bronchitis, but I think it can contribute to it when you have an animal that already is heading that way. In young, healthy animals, you don't tend to see long-term effects.
Okay. Someone asked, or she said she requests that no daycare or dog parks 14 days prior to a lodging stay, but you can't stop groomers and owners from taking their dogs, to stores or other public places. So, some of it does just fall on common sense, as well as the business using healthy cleaning practices in order to prevent as much of a transmission area as possible. Jessica, you and I were talking about this yesterday, but there are so many ways I think that pet parents overhumanize their dogs. One example, I know that all of us have probably received a call at our pet care facility or veterinary clinic that, my dog has been vomiting for 24 hours. What should I feed it? Nothing. If I was vomiting for 24 hours, I would not want someone to serve me a steak or even boiled rice and chicken. Just let their bellies rest. And then in other ways, they don't necessarily know what that honking cough sounds like. So they think the dog's trying to clear their throat, and they don't do anything to assist the dog. And that persistent coughing just causes more irritation and can lead to other things. So yeah, I do think there's a huge component for all of us as far as educating pet parents on what to look for. And, I know it's hard nowadays, no matter how many email blasts you send out, a lot of people just don't take the time to read that. So having a little screen in your lobby with a YouTube video of a dog coughing, something like that, so they can literally hear what it sounds like when you're talking about the fact that there's something going around in the community.
And coughing begets coughing. There's a reason that cough suppressants actually do, help and work in people and dogs, is because the more they cough, the more they're going to cough. Coughing itself causes irritation, and irritation causes coughing, and which is part of the reason that will recommend a harness and limit how much barking, if you can, to some of these dogs, because the more they cough, the more they need to cough. And we all probably have had one of those bronchitises where we're like, if I start coughing, I won't stop, but if I can keep myself from starting, I'll probably be okay. So there's certainly something to be said for limiting coughing if you can. I mean, realistically, you can't always, but if you can, it can be helpful.
So Caitlin asks, what are your thoughts on UV disinfectant technology? It has a high kill, has a high kill rate against a lot of viral and bacterial pathogens, but it's quite expensive. Is investing in the product worth it, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it would be no. You're not dealing with an emergency. You're not dealing with an operating room situation. You are never going to be able to keep, you're going to be able to keep loads down. You're not looking for sterility. You're looking to keep viral and bacterial loads down, because the minute the next dog walks in, they're going to bring something in with them. So short of everybody living in a UV environment all the time where you're trying to kill everything, which is not a thing, the cost benefit ratio where that's concerned is pretty minimal. I mean, even veterinary hospitals don't use it in their surgical suites. I mean, they do it in human hospitals, but because there are ways to achieve sterility without it, it's just, human hospitals have a different level of budget, let's just say.
That's true. So Renee said, in your opinion, should dogs be cleared by a veterinarian before returning to daycare?
Well, the problem is they can be shedding without coughing. And so I'm not sure that veterinary clearance is going to necessarily help you very much, is because you can have asymptomatic dogs that spread the virus, or spread other viruses. So being cleared by a vet, I mean, and we've all been to the doctor and we've I think I'm getting something. And your doctor says, nope, I don't think so. And then 2 days later you have it, whatever it was, it just hadn't really emerged yet. So I don't know that being cleared is going to be meaningful.
So Ed or Anna, is there anything else that you would like to add to the conversation?
Of course. I have several things, because and I don't want to leave without talking to Dr. Hurd about relationships with veterinarians, because that is what is so important to me as a business owner. It has changed how I make decisions, and like I said, Jessica and I are very close, but we have other relationships too. And so I feel like not all veterinarians are business owners. So where you have a more realistic approach to things, I think sometimes we are faced with veterinarians who say, oh, well, don't take them to daycare anymore, and don't do this and don't do that. And so I would love to hear your advice on how our other facility owners develop those good relationships with veterinarians that they don't necessarily already have a good relationship with. And then my second question is, what are your answers to clients who insist that they don't want to vaccinate, that it's unnecessary? I remember discussing with one veterinarian, a holistic veterinarian, she was telling her clients not to do it. So I'd love to hear your response to those two things, please.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's always a good idea to, people love to kind of share information and their opinions about certain things. So I think it is worth getting to know the veterinarians that are closest to your facility, that you're going to have the most contact with. You will have, everyone has an opinion in the world, and you will have veterinarians who disagree about their opinion, but you all, this is something I really understand, you all are running a business, and you have to protect your business and protect and know what you can live with and what you cannot live with at night. And you all are going to have the old animals that have been coming in for years, and people who want to manage their pets' health differently are going to have to make decisions about how how their dogs are cared for. but they're there on your watch, and you all are responsible for them. And so while I don't in any way disagree with somebody who doing something in a holistic way, it means they might not be able to take them to a lodging facility. It means they might not be able to travel with them. There are lots of situations where you can't have everything. And I tell clients all the time, you can have anything you want, but probably not everything you want. So you have to pick and choose. And there are people who are like, I don't want to vaccinate, but I want to lodge. And I'm like, well, pick one. You don't have the choice of one or the other. Or hire someone to come stay in your home if that's what you want to do, but you can't, it's not safe for them. And I do have older clients who will actually hire someone who will come stay with them, who is, because they have a heart condition, or because they're afraid they're not going to be able to get up, because they're on end of life care, that sort of thing. So there are times where for medical reasons they do. And there are going to be veterinarians who disagree with me and with how I approach it, but you are not looking to just protect an individual dog. You are looking to protect a population of dogs. And I'm a firm believer that, shelter vets manage things very differently than I do with one dog there in front of me. If I'm trying to take care of one pet, I can make different decisions than I am going to than when I take care of 100 pets or 50 pets. If I'm responsible for a population, I need to make decisions based on epidemiology, not just an individual pet's risk.
Yeah, I agree. I know we talked about, it's kind of like the spay neuter issue, that you may set a policy for your business because it's what's in the best interest, not only for your business financially, but also for the pets in your care. And that may be that they're spayed or neutered by, a year of age.
Right.
And that's wonderful. And if somebody comes to you and says, well, I have an agreement with my breeder that they can't be can't be spayed or neutered until they're 18 months or 2 years old, I completely respect the pet parent's right to not spay or neuter, but I will not change my policy for that one dog. My policy is in place for all of the dogs in my care. So definitely the same as far as vaccinations and what you're saying. We also had somebody ask about how many upper respiratory issues are actually Bordetella.
Probably 20 to 30%. I mean, they've done some studies, and the studies varied when they did different populations between, I think, 16 and 38% was kind of the range, depending on which population of dogs they tested.
Do you see a seasonal period? So springtime, maybe when things are blooming and people can get irritated by pollens and things that are in the air. Is it the same for dogs, that you're seeing those same irritations?
The irritation part is the same. I actually feel like most of the time dogs and people are a little bit opposite, because people in the wintertime come together and you have large groups of people indoors. And that's when, at least in Maryland, we have an uptick of the flu, an uptick of upper respiratory things. But dogs come together in the summertime and they play outside together and they go to dog parks together when the weather's nice. Whereas people tend to spread out when the weather's nice. People tend to, come together when the weather's not, or at least in close quarters. So those two things tend to be a little opposite in terms of what we see in, what I know they see in human medicine versus in terms of the infectious component. But in terms of the pollen component and in terms of, the smoke component that we've had from Canada with the bad air quality, that is, that can be year round or whenever it happens to pop up.
Anna, I'm unmuting you. Is there anything else?
She has to be muted because she knows I'm going to interrupt all the time. Sorry. No, I do think that Dr. Hurd has hit a lot of things. I mean, it's a really short period of time to talk about a lot. I think we could spend a whole day talking about this. And I think that, I think a lot of people are afraid to say, this is what you should require. I am not afraid to say that to my clients, but, I think that, you should speak and talk to your local vets and decide and stick to those decisions, and so I do think that that's super important, and I can't stress enough about those relationships because they matter. They can undermine you or they can back you up. I mean, really, right? I mean, when I first met Dr. Hurd, we didn't know each other, and she's like, "Oh, boarding, that's a tough gig." And I knew she was my best friend then. But really, but she gets it, and so, but some vets don't get it, and so they don't understand. Oh, you're trying to run a business, and so it's hard. And they have to talk to their staff. So we'll have office staff from other veterinarians that might say, "Oh, well, you should this or you shouldn't that," or "I heard this about a facility." And so we very politely call and talk to those office managers and say, "We just wanted to talk to you about what your office staff are saying to clients," because again, we don't want to undermine each other. We want to support each other.
Ed, was there anything you wanted to add?
The one thing with getting the vaccinations, we also encourage people, even though it's a little more expensive, if they want to do titers, because sometimes a dog's vaccine may last a little bit longer. And I mean, Dr. Hurd can, correct me or not, but, we will definitely take titers, if the parent wants to spend, the money to do it, because it does get expensive. But other than that, I think we have covered, everything.
I wanted to mention that you said after the first year, you start requiring the influenza vaccine. Thanks for helping me make the decision. So, hey, had a great impact. And then another answer that they do accept titers for the distemper combo only. Oh, okay. So I know most, at least this is how it is in Alaska, have gone to like 3-year vaccines. I don't know if that's specific.
Most distemper parvo and rabies are usually 3-year vaccines now, but distemper and parvo you can titer out, but the other ones there's really not a titer for.
There isn't one for rabies?
There is a rabies titer, but I would under no circumstances accept that. I would only unless there was a really good reason for it, because the risks are just too high to your staff and your whole client population. That's such a zoonotic disease and nobody can ever ensure that there's never going to be a fox or a bunny or a rabbit or anything that gets on their property and that doesn't cause some exposure. So I would not. Rabies is one of those things that I think most of us are pretty aligned on, that it's just too much. The risks are too high.
Okay, good to know. Any other comments here? The state of Illinois will not allow us to accept titers for rabies. So, perfect.
Nor should they.
Yeah.
Well,
it's interesting because in Alaska, where I'm at, there has been, very few, if not any, rabies positive cases that have happened. But in the rural areas, there are a lot of wild animals who have, especially foxes, that are positive for rabies. So if any animal is flown into Anchorage, that risk is there. So yeah, I know that the state veterinarian is pretty tight on making sure that those vaccinations are current.
And I don't want to go off on a tangent here in terms of rabies, but I will say one of the things that I've learned in Maryland is the most rabies happens in the counties actually with the most amount of money. And people are always surprised by that. And it's not because that's where the most rabies happens. It's because that's where they have the most animal control officers, because you will not find something you are not looking for. And rural areas tend to not always be able to afford to go looking for it or can pick up or test everything. So it's interesting to me that sometimes when they say, "Oh, we don't have any rabies here," it's not that they don't have rabies here, because if you don't test for rabies, you will not find rabies conveniently. So it doesn't mean that you don't have rabies there. So people need to think about like what's involved in testing animals for rabies or testing animals for anything. But because if you don't test them, you will not have it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means, and as somebody pointed out, the influenza test can be very expensive, and it can. But because there's no positive test does not mean you don't have influenza. It means that nobody paid for a test sometimes. So it's just something that I kind of keep in mind when I'm looking at people who say, "Oh, we don't have that here." Well, you may, you may not.
Do you recommend that they do the test for influenza?
I only recommend that they do the test if there is a need, or if most of the time it is self-limiting. But if they're going to be traveling or working or that sort of thing, and they develop a cough and they're worried about, okay, how long do I need to quarantine for, or is this something that I need to worry about spreading to other dogs, or what am I doing with my dog, and how is my dog doing? So then we'll recommend the testing to figure out exactly what it is. But if it's going to be something that ultimately ends up being self-limiting, I don't feel like the test is absolutely necessary.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, first, I just want to thank Dr. Hurd for being here, because this has been very informative. I've really enjoyed this. And having Ed and Anna, our coaches, join us has been great to have other perspectives from big leading pet care business owners. Thank you to the audience. If you are not a member of our Grow Your Facebook page, Grow Your Pet Care Business Facebook group, it is free to join. And I will put that link in the chat box so that you're able to select that. We only have 2 rules to join, and that is be nice. We want it to be a friendly community, and don't try to sell stuff. So let me add that in the chat. Make sure it posts up. Perfect. Maybe yes. Oh, there it is. Okay, perfect. So you can select that link if you would like to join the group. And other last comments from Anna? No. Thank you so much again for joining us, and thanks to the audience. And we will see you.
Thank you.